Something doesn't add up. The numbers don't match the promises. And today, millions of people are starting to realise they may have been misled. Britain was told this budget was safe, responsible, fully costed, but now a shocking revelation has exploded into the open. A £30 billion gap hidden in plain sight. And one man stepped forward and said what no one else would. Nigel Farage has exposed a bombshell that could tear apart Labour's credibility and shake public trust to its core. And what's emerging now raises serious questions about honesty, leadership, and who will really pay the price. For weeks, the Labour Party stood confidently in front of the country and promised stability. They said their budget was responsible. They said every figure had been checked. They said working people would be protected. No hidden tax rises, no nasty surprises, everything fully funded, everything under control. But behind the confident speeches and carefully chosen words, the reality was very different. Economic figures released today paint a worrying picture. Living standards are falling again, households are feeling poorer, bills are rising, and yet the government insists everything is fine. That this is part of a careful plan, that the public should trust them, that trust is now cracking. Nigel Farage stepped into the spotlight and did what few others were willing to do. He challenged the numbers directly. He didn't rely on slogans or spin. He relied on documents, figures, and simple math. And what he revealed sent shockwaves through Westminster. At the heart of Labour's budget, Farage claims, is a £30 billion hole. A massive gap that was never properly explained to the public. A gap that raises one unavoidable question. If the money isn't there, where will it come from? Because money doesn't disappear. If it's missing from the budget, it will be taken from somewhere else. Higher taxes, higher costs, less support. And it won't be politicians who feel it first. It will be ordinary people. Farage accused Labour of saying one thing while quietly doing another, promising no tax rises while allowing costs to creep up through the back door, calling it adjustment, calling it technical, calling it necessary. But for families already struggling, these aren't technical details. They are real pressures, real losses, real sacrifices. What makes this moment so powerful is how fast the story unravelled. Labour's carefully built narrative collapsed in minutes. Reporters went silent, interviews grew tense, questions multiplied, but answers became harder to find. And then attention turned to Rachel Reeves. She presented herself as the steady hand, the economist, the safe choice, someone who understood numbers and responsibility. But now her past claims, her credibility and her explanations are all under intense scrutiny, not just from political opponents, but from the public itself. Because when trust is broken, people start looking back, they start questioning what they were taught, and they start asking whether this budget was ever as honest as it was claimed to be. This is no longer just a political argument. This is about transparency, about whether voters were given the full truth, and about whether the cost of this budget will fall on the very people who were promised protection. And this is only the beginning. Once the £30 billion figure was spoken out loud, everything changed. What had been sold as a solid, reliable budget suddenly looked fragile. The room shifted. The confidence drained away, because this was not a small accounting error or a minor oversight. This was a gap so large it demanded immediate answers, yet none came. Nigel Farage made one point very clear. If a budget is truly fully funded, there should be no mystery. Every pound should be accounted for. Every promise should be backed by real money. But what he exposed was the opposite. Numbers that didn't align, projections that relied on optimism rather than certainty, and costs that appeared to have been pushed into the future or quietly ignored for now. The most troubling part was how this gap was explained away. Instead of clear answers, the public was given vague language. Phrases like long-term planning and economic flexibility were repeated again and again. But behind those words was a simple truth. Someone, somewhere would have to pay, and it would not be the politicians delivering speeches. It would be working families, small businesses and pensioners already stretched to their limits. Farage argued that the budget relied heavily on assumptions that may never become reality, growth forecasts that look hopeful on paper but fragile in practice, savings that depend on perfect conditions, and revenue that assumes the public can absorb more pressure without pushing back. This is not careful planning. This is gambling with people's livelihoods. As he laid out the figures, the scale of the problem became impossible to ignore. Billions unaccounted for, spending commitments without clear funding sources, and a government insisting everything is under control. While the maths tells a very different story, the contradiction was stark, and the silence from Labour only made it louder. What angered many observers was not just the gap itself, but how it was hidden. This was not presented honestly to voters. It was buried beneath technical language and optimistic timelines. The public was told one story during the campaign, and now a very different story is emerging after the votes were counted. Social media erupted within minutes. People began asking the same questions again and again. If this £30 billion gap is real, how will it be filled? Which taxes will rise? Which services will be cut? And why were these possibilities never made clear from the start? Small business owners expressed fear that they would once again be squeezed. Workers worried about deductions quietly increasing from their paychecks. Families questioned how they could manage if everyday costs continue to climb while wages lag behind. These are not abstract concerns. They're immediate and deeply personal. Labour's response did little to calm the situation. Statements were carefully worded but avoided the core issue. No clear breakdown, no simple explanation, no direct acknowledgement of the gap itself. And in politics, avoidance often speaks louder than denial. This is why the £30 billion question refuses to go away, because until it is answered clearly, trust cannot be restored. And the longer the silence continues, the more it appears that this was not a misunderstanding but a deliberate choice to withhold the full truth. The pressure is building, the public is watching closely, and every day without answers makes the fallout more severe. As the fallout from the £30 billion revelation spread, attention shifted from the numbers themselves to the people responsible for defending them. Because when a budget begins to unravel, it is credibility that collapses first. And right now, Labour's leadership is struggling to hold the line. Rachel Reeves had built her image carefully. She presented herself as the expert, the economist, the steady hand who understood how money works. That image was central to Labour's message. Voters were asked to trust her judgment, her experience and her honesty. But the growing contradictions have made that trust harder to sustain. Past claims are now being revisited. Statements once accepted without question are being examined more closely. How long she worked at the Bank of England, what her role actually involved, how her experience was described to the public. On their own, these details might seem small, but when combined with a budget surrounded by unanswered questions, they take on far greater weight. Because this is not just about one figure on a CV or one line in a speech. It is about a pattern of presentation that appears stronger than the reality behind it. And when the public senses that image matters more than accuracy, confidence begins to erode. Nigel Farage focused directly on this point. He argued that if voters were misled about qualifications and experience, they may also have been misled about the budget itself, not through outright lies, but through exaggeration, selective truth, and careful wording designed to reassure rather than inform. Meanwhile, the pressure on Labour's wider leadership continues to grow. Keir Starmer, who positioned himself as a calm and responsible alternative to chaos, now faces a narrative he cannot easily control. Each interview becomes more tense. Each question about funding becomes harder to deflect. And each attempt to move on only draws more attention back to the unanswered £30 billion gap. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is timing. Households are already under strain. Inflation has eaten away at savings. Interest rates have punished homeowners and businesses are cutting back. Against this backdrop, any hint of hidden costs or future tax rises feels like a betrayal. Across the country, frustration is turning into anger. People are no longer willing to accept reassurances without evidence. They want clear numbers, clear explanations, and clear accountability. They want to know why they were told one thing only to discover another after the fact. Commentators who once dismissed criticism as political noise are now hesitating because the questions being asked are not ideological, they are practical. If the budget is fully costed, show the maths. If taxes will not rise, explain how the gap will be filled. If nothing has been hidden, why does everything feel so unclear? The longer these questions remain unanswered, the more damaging the silence becomes. Trust, once lost, is not easily regained, and in politics, credibility is everything. Without it, promises mean nothing, and authority fades quickly. This is the danger Labour now faces, not just criticism from opponents, but doubt from the very people they asked to believe in them. And as that doubt spreads, the crisis deepens. What is unfolding now goes far beyond party politics. This is no longer a simple clash between rivals or a noisy debate inside Westminster. This is a moment of reckoning, a moment when the British public is asking whether honesty still matters in leadership and whether promises made during campaigns can be trusted once power is secured. The £30 billion gap has become more than a number. It is a symbol of uncertainty, confusion, and fear about what comes next. Because when governments fail to explain where the money will come from, people assume the worst. And history has taught them to be cautious. Working families are already doing the maths at their kitchen tables. They are looking at food bills, energy costs, rent and mortgages, and wondering how much more they can absorb. Small business owners are asking whether new costs will quietly appear in the form of fees, charges, or tax changes. Pensioners are worrying about whether support they rely on will be reduced to balance the books. These concerns are not driven by ideology. They are driven by lived experience. People have seen this before. Grand promises followed by quiet reversals. Reassurances followed by explanations about why sacrifices are necessary. And every time it happens, trust weakens further. Nigel Farage may have been the one to raise the alarm, but the reaction shows this issue has struck a nerve. The questions now being asked belong to millions. Why was this gap not clearly explained from the beginning? Why were voters told there would be no hidden tax rises? And why does the budget feel like it is unravelling only after scrutiny began? Silence is no longer an option. The demand for transparency is growing louder by the day. People want clarity, not spin. They want straight answers, not carefully managed statements. And they want leaders who are willing to admit mistakes rather than hide behind technical language. This moment will define more than just a single budget. It will define reputations, it will define trust, and it will determine whether the public believes that those in power truly understand the pressures they face. Because once people stop believing, governing becomes impossible. Promises lose their meaning, authority weakens, and frustration turns into resistance. The story is far from over. The budget will face deeper scrutiny. The £30 billion gap will not disappear simply because it is inconvenient, and the questions will keep coming until answers are given. One thing is clear: Britain is watching closely, and this time it is not willing to look away.